Bennett Risson had never considered himself a lark, but 5 in the morning had become his own personal time. A time of silence, fresh air, and thoughts not yet clouded by the day's hustle and bustle. At 43, he discovered that morning jogging was the only thing that kept in check not only his rapidly reclaiming belly, but also the anxiety that had haunted him since his divorce. Tightening the laces of his sneakers, Bennett silently closed the door to his apartment in the River Creek apartment complex and breathed in the cool Texas air. Austin was still asleep, only the sparse windows glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. He turned on the familiar playlist and headed down the familiar route around the public pool. The first 100 meters were always hard. His body resisted, his muscles whimpered, his breathing hitched. Just a little longer and it'll get easier, Bennett encouraged himself, when suddenly something unusual made him slow down. There was a dark spot in the pool, which was always empty at this time of day. Taking off his headphones, Risson approached the edge. His heart skipped a beat when he realized he was looking at a human body floating face down. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, looking around as if searching for someone to refute the obvious. Bennett stood there for a few seconds, then instinct overcame his stupor. He knelt at the edge of the pool and tried to reach for the floating figure. The body, obeying the slight movement of the water, slowly turned, and Bennett finally managed to grasp the sleeve of his shirt. He pulled the body closer with difficulty. A young guy, just a boy. Pale face, blue lips, unnaturally relaxed limbs, narrow shoulders under a soaked shirt, blonde hair sticking to his forehead. It flashed through Bennett's mind that he might have been the same age as his son, if he'd had one. With trembling fingers, Risson fumbled for the phone and dialed 911. "Emergency services, what's your emergency?" He heard a woman's collected voice. I found a body," his voice trembled, "in the pool of the River Creek apartment complex. I think he drowned. I tried to retrieve him, but I'm afraid it's too late." "Give me the exact address, sir. Stay on the line." After dictating the address of the compound, Bennett sank down onto the chaise. A strange numbness came over him, as if the world around him had become unreal. The body in the water, now drifting slowly toward the center of the pool again, seemed like an eerie hallucination. Risson couldn't take his eyes off it, frantically going over the faces of people he'd met in the complex. He seemed to have seen this guy a few times, in the parking lot maybe, or in the cafe on the first floor. Time stretched and then compressed as the silence was broken by the wail of sirens. 2 paramedics with first aid equipment quickly ran towards the pool, followed by a police car. "Did you find the body?" the older officer asked, looking at Bennett sternly. Risson nodded, suddenly feeling nauseous. He swallowed and tried to speak calmly. "I was just taking my morning jog, spotted him in the water." The paramedics acted quickly and professionally. One deftly hooked the body with a long rescue hook, while another helped pull the deceased out and lay him on the tiles. Bennett turned away as the medic began to check for signs of life, but he already knew the result. A brief shake of his head only confirmed the obvious. "The detective will be here shortly," the officer said, writing down Bennett's contact information. "You'll have to stay and testify." The apartment complex was slowly waking up. A few early larks peered curiously at the police cars as they passed by, but they were quickly directed away. Detective Mira Dawson arrived around 6 in the morning, a tall woman with short dark hair and shrewd eyes, dressed in a strict suit as if she were going to a business meeting rather than a crime scene. "Mr. Risson?" She held out a firm palm. "Detective Dawson, tell me everything from the beginning." Bennett repeated his story, careful not to leave out any details. While they were talking, the coroner was examining the body in full gear. "Preliminary cause of death is drowning," the examiner reported as Dawson approached. "I see head trauma, probably from hitting the curb. Based on body temperature and rigor mortis, death occurred between midnight and 2 a.m. Dawson nodded. Dawson nodded and went back to examining the scene. Her attention was drawn to the 2 glasses on the table near the chaise lounges. She photographed them carefully before handing them over to the lab. "Interesting," she murmured, crouching down and studying the tiles around the pool. "See these streaks? And right here it looks like blood. There was a struggle here." The detective stood up and looked at a lone man's shoe lying nearby. "Check the security cameras," she ordered one of the officers. We need footage from midnight to 2. The examination of the body continued. A search of the dead man's pockets turned up a soaked wallet and a hopelessly damaged cell phone, the screen blackened by water and the case already beginning to oxidize. The electronics are finished, the technician stated, carefully placing the cell phone in an evidence bag. But we can determine the number from the SIM card. The wallet was a sorry sight too, but the driver's license inside was still legible. Ash Kinney, 22 years old, the officer reported, holding up the soggy card with 2 fingers. The address is on East 6th Street. Dawson examined the photo on the driver's license, a handsome young man with blonde hair and an open smile. Now his lifeless body was being prepared for transportation to the morgue. Send a request to the service provider, she said, writing down the dead man's phone number. We need the details for the last week, especially last night. By 7 o'clock this morning, Ash Kinney's body had been bagged and sent to the morgue. The detective scrutinized the list of residents in the complex, noting the apartments closest to the pool. Apartment 302, owned by the Connolly couple, caught her particular attention. Dawson went up to the 3rd floor and pressed the bell. The door was opened by a young woman with brown hair gathered in a careless bun. Her sleepy eyes expressed a mixture of surprise and wariness. Liza Connolly? Dawson asked, showing her badge. Detective Mira Dawson, Austin PD. Yeah, that's me. The woman fixed her hair nervously. Is something wrong? Can I come in? I have a few questions. Liza hesitated for a moment, then stepped back, allowing the detective into the spacious apartment. In the living room, a man with short dark hair and thin-rimmed glasses sat at a laptop computer. David, this is... Detective. Liza introduced him in a strangely shaky voice. David Connolly stood up, extending his hand in greeting. Unlike his wife, he seemed perfectly calm. What can we do for you? He asked, gesturing for Dawson to sit down. The detective remained standing. The body of a young man named Ash Kinney was found in your apartment complex this morning, she said, watching their reactions carefully. Do you know him? Liza paled as rapidly as if someone had turned off the light beneath her skin. Her hand instinctively went to her throat. Ash? Her voice was barely audible. That guy from the Irish coffee cafe? She cast a quick glance at her husband, who shifted his eyebrows faintly. Terrible. What had happened to him? Did you know him well? Dawson avoided answering, noting how Liza recognized the name immediately. Not really, David interjected, putting a hand on his wife's shoulder. He worked as a barista at a cafe Liza frequented. We crossed paths a couple times when I went to pick her up. Didn't we, dear? Liza nodded, but avoided making eye contact with the detective. Where were you both last night between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m.? Dawson asked, shifting her gaze from husband to wife. At home, David answered without hesitation. I got home from work around 7, and we ate dinner, watched a movie, and went to bed around 11. Yes, we did, Liza confirmed, but her voice sounded uncertain, as if she were repeating a memorized text. Do you frequent the complex's public pool? Sometimes on weekends, David answered. Why? Instead of answering, Dawson pulled out her phone and showed them a picture of the Scene 2 glasses on a table. Do these glasses look familiar to you? The couple shook their heads in sync. One last thing for now, the detective continued. Have either of you corresponded with Ash Kinney? Maybe arranged a meeting? No, Liza answered too quickly, and Dawson saw her neck tense. Why do you ask? David's voice sounded suspicious for the first time. It's standard procedure, Dawson replied softly and held out her business card. Here are my contacts. If you think of anything that might help the investigation, please contact me. As she left the apartment, the detective was certain of 2 things. Liza Connolly knew Ash Kinney much better than she admitted, and the couple was hiding something. The next point of investigation was the Irish coffee cafe. Dawson pushed open the glass door and entered a cozy room with the smell of freshly ground beans and pastries. A bearded middle-aged man stood behind the counter, wiping down the coffee machine. Police! The detective showed her badge. I'd like to ask a few questions about Ash Kinney. The bartender frowned, setting aside his towel. Ash, what happened to him? Unfortunately, I have some bad news. Dawson lowered her voice even though there weren't many customers. He was found dead this morning. The man inhaled sharply and shook his head. Bloody hell. I just can't believe it. Such a young guy. How long had he worked here? About a year. Great worker. Customers loved him. The bartender gulped. How did this happen? We're looking into it, Dawson said evasively. Tell me, do you know a woman named Liza Connolly? Does she come here often? The bartender grinned, but not cheerfully. I bet she does. She sits here with a laptop almost every day, freelancing, writing some kind of article. He got serious all of a sudden. Look, I don't want to set anybody up. I'm just trying to find out the truth. Dawson nudged him gently. The bartender sighed and leaned closer to the detective. She and Ash talked a lot. A lot. He always served her table himself, even if he was swamped with work. Sometimes they sat together during his break. Nothing explicit, just talking, but, I've been in this business 20 years and I know what chemistry looks like between people. You think they were in a relationship? I can't say, but it looked that way from the outside. He shrugged. Ash always perked up when she came over. And she, always found an excuse to touch his hand when he put his cup down. Little things like that. Back at the station, Dawson sent a request to her cell phone carrier for call and text details from Ash's phone. The glasses found by the pool had already been fingerprinted. Some belonged to Ash, others hadn't been identified yet, but Dawson had her suspicions. After lunch, the detective met with an elderly lady who lived next door to Kennelly. Oh yes, I've seen this young man, the neighbor confirmed, adjusting her glasses. He came by a few times, mostly in the afternoon when her husband was at work. A nice-looking boy, polite. I thought maybe he was a brother or a cousin. Did you notice anything unusual? Well, I went to take out the trash once and I saw them saying goodbye at the door. Pretty, emotional. Like when people aren't just friends. But I try not to pry. She raised an eyebrow meaningfully. By late afternoon, forensic examination of the body yielded the first results. The cause of death was drowning after a head injury from hitting a hard surface. There were no traces of alcohol or drugs in Ash's blood. Among the documents found in Ash's apartment were medical certificates and records of hormone therapy. Dawson was surprised to learn that Ash was born female and had only begun transitioning 4 years ago. For the past 2 years, he had officially identified himself as a man. This fact made the detective wonder, did Liza know about Ash's transgenderism? And more importantly, did her husband David know about it? The surveillance footage of the compound was incomplete. They covered almost the entire perimeter of the pool, except for the far corner where the lounge chairs and tables stood. The footage showed a young man who looked like Ash approaching the pool at about 10:30 p.m. He sat down at a table at the back of the pool. He sat down at a table in the camera's blind spot. At about 11 o'clock, a female figure very similar to Liza Connolly headed toward the pool. The recording cut off at 1:15 a.m. due to a technical glitch in the system. By the end of the day, Detective Dawson had received the first data from the service provider. Ash's contact list included a number that had called him at 9:30 last night. The number belonged to Liza Connolly. In her office, looking at the evidence board, Dawson pondered the strange picture that was beginning to emerge. A married woman, a secret affair with a young transgender man, a late-night poolside encounter that ended in tragedy. Something happened between midnight and 2 a.m. in that camera-blind corner, and the Connolly couple were clearly lying about their actions and the extent of their acquaintance with the deceased. The question was this a random tragedy or something far more sinister? Detective Mira Dawson began the second day of the investigation by reviewing the Connolly couple's records. Photos from the scene of the accident, witness statements, camera footage, all of this was already laid out on her desk, but the missing details did not add up to a coherent picture. The door to the office opened and her partner Tony Ramirez walked in with a folder of documents. "Good morning. Got some information on our prime suspects," he said, taking a seat across from Dawson. "David and Liza Connolly moved to Austin from Detroit 6 months ago. He's an automotive engineer working for Texas Motors, and she's a freelance writer for several online publications." Dawson took the offered folder and flipped through the documents. "What made them leave Detroit? A job transfer?" "Officially, yes," Ramirez nodded. "But the strange thing is, in Detroit, David was in a higher position with a better salary. I think he asked for a transfer to the Texas branch." "It's like they were running away from something," Dawson said thoughtfully. Anything from their past? Any trouble with the law? Neighbor complaints? Nothing, Ramirez said with a wave of his hands. Nothing at all. No speeding tickets, no noise complaints, not a single police record. Perfect citizens. Dawson frowned. In her experience, perfect backgrounds often hid the darkest secrets. I need more information on the surveillance system at River Creek, she said, rising. And I want to talk to the complex manager again. An hour later, Dawson was standing in the cramped office of Harold Pratt, a full-bodied man with balding hair, who was proudly showing her the surveillance system. 32 cameras for the entire complex, Pratt explained, pointing to the monitors. Parking lots, building entrances, elevators, the pool all monitored. Are there blind spots? Dawson asked. The manager hesitated. Well, some tenants have complained about excessive invasion of privacy. We've left a few, shall we say, private areas, like the far corner of the pool where the lounge chairs and tables are. The same corner where the glasses were found and the signs of a struggle? Yes, that's it, Pratt nodded. A lot of the tenants like to relax there. It's the most secluded spot in the complex. Dawson made a note in her notebook. How long have you known the Connollys? Since they moved in, of course. Good tenants, quiet, pay on time. David's a bit quiet, but he always says hello. Liza's more social, uses the pool and the gym a lot. Notice anything unusual about their behavior? Pratt thought for a moment. Nothing in particular. Although, one of our guards mentioned seeing Mrs. Connolly with a young man a few times. Blonde, skinny. They usually met when Mr. Connolly was at work. I assumed it was her brother. Can you provide the security footage from the last 2 weeks? Of course, Detective. Just need a formal request. Dawson nodded, putting the notepad away. You'll have it within the hour. Back at the station, Dawson found that the first results of the investigation had come in. Tech was able to regain access to Ash Kinney's cloud storage. His password was written in a notebook found in the apartment, explained the technician with bright blue strands in her hair. And a warrant for his personal information has already been obtained, so it's official. What's inside? Dawson asked. Lots of stuff. The tech turned the laptop screen toward the detective. Photos, messages, notes. This guy and Mrs. Connolly were clearly more than just acquaintances. Dawson perused the contents of the cloud storage with growing interest. Hundreds of photos of Ash and Liza, in the park, in restaurants, in cafes. Many showed them holding hands or hugging. A few were taken by the pool, in the far corner, out of view of the cameras. But the most valuable find was the backed-up messages. The correspondence between Ash and Liza told a story of passion, doubt, and growing anxiety. Sometimes I think David suspects something, Liza wrote 3 days before the tragedy. He asks strange questions about my late arrivals home. Maybe it's time to tell him the truth, Ash suggested. I'm not ready yet. I can't imagine how he'll react, especially considering your situation. Dawson understood that it was about Ash's transgenderism. Judging from the correspondence, Liza feared that her husband, who had grown up in a conservative family, would not accept the fact. The last message was sent on the eve of the tragedy. Tomorrow at 10, by the pool. I'll wait until he's asleep and slip out. Looking forward to seeing you. Dawson leaned back in her chair, mulling over the information she'd received. The relationship between Liza and Ash was much more serious than just meeting in a coffee shop. Judging from their correspondence, they were planning a future together. I need to talk to Liza Connolly again, the detective decided, but this time in a more, informal setting. She called Liza and suggested they meet at the apartment complex for a short talk and walk. Liza agreed, although she could hear the tension in her voice. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Dawson met Liza in the lobby of the River Creek complex. The young woman looked pale and gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes. Thank you for taking the time, Dawson began as they walked leisurely through the grounds. I thought it might be easier for you to talk outside the police station. Of course, Liza fixed her hair nervously. What can I do for you? Tell me more about your life here. How long have you been in Austin? Do you like the complex? We moved from Detroit 6 months ago, Liza answered, relaxing a little. David was offered a job here. The complex is very nice, lots of amenities. Which ones do you use most often? The gym, the library. Sometimes I go to the recreation room where I can play board games or just read in silence. They were approaching the pool area, still fenced off with police tape. Dawson noticed Liza tense up, her gaze darting to the far corner for a moment. "What about the pool?" the detective asked casually. "Do you use it often?" Liza took a deep breath as if gathering her thoughts. "I used to love the pool, but after Ash drowned there, I stopped going," she said, and then she froze, realizing her mistake. Dawson stopped and looked at the woman carefully. "Mrs. Connolly," she said slowly, "I never once told you that Ash Kinney had drowned. I certainly never mentioned that his body was found in the pool." Liza's face turned even paler. She opened her mouth, but couldn't utter a word. "That information was deliberately withheld from the residents of the complex," Dawson continued. "All I said was that the young man was found dead. How do you know the circumstances of his death?" Liza pressed her hand to her throat as if she was having trouble breathing. I was just guessing," she finally squeezed out. "We're talking about the pool, and I know that something happened to Ash. I just put two and two together. But you specifically said drowned, not just died or died. That's pretty specific." "Yeah, I don't know why I said it that way. I guess since it was about the pool, it was the first thing that came to mind." Dawson stared at Liza studyingly, noting the signs of severe stress: trembling hands, avoidant gaze, shallow breathing. "Mrs. Connolly, I think we should continue this conversation in a more formal setting, and perhaps in the presence of your husband." An hour later, the Connollys were sitting across from Dawson and Ramirez in the police station interview room. David looked tense but focused, Liza completely overwhelmed. "I've invited you both in," Dawson began, laying the printouts of messages and photographs on the table, "because I have new evidence that contradicts your original statements." She pointed to pictures of Liza and Ash together. "Your wife and Ash Kinney had a relationship, Mr. Connolly. Not just an acquaintance through a coffee shop, but a romantic relationship that lasted several months." David cast a brief glance at the photos, but his face didn't reflect surprise, only a slight grimace. "I've also discovered that on the night of Ash's death, the two of you were not sleeping at home as you claimed earlier. The cameras recorded Liza leaving the apartment at 10 p.m. and heading for the pool. And at 12:15 you went to the pool, Mr. Connolly." The couple looked at each other but said nothing. "Besides, Liza mentioned to me today that Ash had drowned in the pool, information that the police hadn't released," Dawson finished, watching their reactions carefully. Again, a brief exchange of glances between the couple. "Detective," David finally spoke, his voice steady, "my wife and I have discussed the situation and decided that we need to be completely honest." "I'm glad to hear that," Ramirez interjected. "Yes, there was a relationship between Liza and Ash," David continued. "I found out about it a few weeks ago when I accidentally saw the messages on her phone." "So you knew about your wife's affair?" Dawson clarified. "Yes," David nodded. "We discussed it. I was furious at first, of course. But then Liza and I talked a lot about our problems, about what we were missing in our marriage. And you just, accepted her cheating on you?" "I didn't. We've been working on our relationship. Liza promised to stop seeing Ash, but she said she had to talk to him in person first, explain everything." "What happened the night he died?" David sighed and rubbed his face with his hands. "Liza went to the pool to meet Ash and tell him it was over between them. I stayed home and gave them a chance to talk alone." "That's true," Liza put in quietly. "I met up with Ash around 10. We talked, had a few drinks. I told him I wanted to save the marriage and I couldn't see him anymore." "How did he react?" Dawson asked. "He was upset at first, of course, but then, he understood. He was always understanding," Liza said, tears welling up in her eyes. "We said goodbye around 11:30. He was alive and well when I left." "Why did you go to the pool later, Mr. Connolly?" David clasped his hands together nervously. "I was worried about Liza. She came home upset but said she was fine. After a while I couldn't take it anymore and decided to go check it out. I wanted to make sure this guy wasn't hanging around." "And what did you find?" "Nothing. The pool was empty. I walked around the grounds, but I didn't see anyone." "So you're both saying you were the last people to see Ash Kinney alive, and you don't know what happened to him afterward?" That's right, David said firmly. When I was at the pool, he was gone. Dawson leaned back in her chair, studying the couple. Then explain to me how Liza knew that Ash had drowned in the pool. I didn't specifically mention the circumstances of his death. Liza turned pale. I just assumed, since you're asking about the pool in connection with Ash's death. I didn't connect those things, Dawson reminded her. I was just asking if you frequent the pool. There was a long pause. Liza looked helplessly at her husband. David straightened, his face rigid. Listen, Detective, we're both telling the truth. We don't know what happened to Ash after we left. Maybe he went back to the pool later and slipped. Maybe he got sick, we don't know. But your wife somehow knows he drowned, Dawson insisted. It's just a guess, Liza almost shouted. I didn't know for sure, it's just… When you mentioned the pool, it was the first thing that came to mind. It makes sense. If a man was found dead near water, he'd probably drowned. Dawson exchanged a glance with Ramirez. They both sensed that the couple wasn't telling the truth, but there wasn't enough evidence. All right, Dawson finally said. I have no further questions at this point, but the investigation is ongoing. If you can think of anything else about that night, anything that might help us clarify the circumstances of Ash Kinney's death, I'd like you to contact me immediately. As the Connollys left the interrogation room, Ramirez turned to Dawson. Do you believe them? Not for a second, she shook her head. They're both hiding something. And that drowning clause, it's too specific for a simple guess. Do you think they were there when it happened? Dawson tapped her pen on the table thoughtfully. I'm pretty sure they were. The question is, what exactly did they see? And why they chose to cover it up? She looked again at the photos from the scene, the pool, the two glasses on the table, the signs of a struggle on the tiles. The Connerly's story didn't explain all those details. Let's keep digging, Dawson said firmly. Their mystery is somewhere on the surface. We just need to find the right angle. Detective Mira Dawson stared at the scene photos spread out on the table. 2 weeks into the investigation, and she still felt that the Connolly couple were hiding something important. Their testimony looked smooth, but there were too many coincidences and odd gaps in it. Liza's caveat about the drowning didn't leave her alone. It was too specific for pure conjecture. But without hard evidence, Dawson couldn't move forward. The phone on the desk rang, interrupting her train of thought. Dawson speaking. Detective, it's Risson. Bennett Risson, who found the body by the pool. I remembered something important. There was excitement in the man's voice. Dawson straightened up in her chair. I'm listening to you, Mr. Risson. That night, before I went to bed, I went out on the balcony to smoke. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. I heard voices from across the pool, male and female. They were muffled, but clearly arguing. Dawson was quickly taking notes. Finally, something concrete. Did you see anyone? No, it was dark, and the balcony faces the other way. But then, as I was about to go into the apartment, I noticed a man walking quickly away from the pool. He was dressed in dark clothes, but the figure… Risson hesitated. It looked a lot like that husband, David Connolly. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time, but now that I remember the details… Are you sure it was around 1 o'clock in the morning? I'm positive. I was just checking the time because I had to get up early for work. Mr. Ritson, would you come down to the station and take this statement on the record? Sure, Detective. I'd like to help. Dawson hung up the phone and looked at her watch thoughtfully. If Risson was right, David Connolly had lied about his time at the pool, and perhaps not just about that. Risson's testimony was important, but not enough. Dawson knew she needed more leads to get the Connolly couple to tell the truth. Dawson's partner, Detective Ramirez, entered the office with a folder in hand. I hear you have a new witness? He asked, taking a seat on the edge of the desk. Yeah, Risson remembered hearing an argument at the pool around 1 a.m., Dawson replied. And he saw a man who looked like David Connolly leaving. That's something, Ramirez nodded. I've got news, too. I was going through the email correspondence of the manager of River Creek. I wanted to see if there were any complaints about Ash Kinney or Connolly. He opened a folder and pulled out a printout. Look what I found. That night, around 1:15, one of the tenants, one James Morrison from apartment 207, sent a message to the complex's general chat room. Dawson picked up the sheet and read it aloud. Who put up a fight by the pool? Stop yelling, normal people are sleeping. I'm calling security now. She looked at Ramirez with growing excitement. Now this was serious. The Connollys claimed they were both home asleep at the time. And here's evidence of an argument by the pool just as Ash was supposedly dying. I contacted Morrison, Ramirez continued. He confirmed that he heard a loud argument, at least 2 men, and what appeared to be a woman. Then there was a splash of water and silence. Dawson jumped up, feeling a rush of adrenaline. Now they had enough to call the Kennelly spouses in for questioning again, and this time she wouldn't let them get away with answers. 2 hours later, David and Liza Connolly sat in the interrogation room. Their attorney, a stern, middle-aged woman, positioned herself between them. My clients have already given all the necessary statements, the attorney began. I don't understand why this meeting was necessary. We have new evidence, Dawson replied calmly. Evidence that directly contradicts your client's testimony. She laid a printout of a chat message on the table. That night at 1:15, James Morrison, a resident of the complex, wrote this message complaining about an argument at the pool. Dawson glanced at David. At the very time you said you were home and asleep. That's an interesting coincidence, isn't it? David kept a stony expression on his face, but Dawson saw him glance quickly at Liza. Besides, the detective continued, Mr. Risson, the same man who discovered Ash's body, remembered seeing you, Mr. Connolly, coming back from the pool around 1 o'clock this morning, and heard an argument, male and female voices. It's a mistake, David said firmly. At 1 o'clock in the morning I was at home, asleep. Mr. Risson must have seen someone else. And how do you explain the chat message? Dawson asked. By chance, several witnesses confirmed that there was an altercation at the pool during the exact time period when Ash Kinney died, according to the coroner's office. Liza sat with her head down, her shoulders visibly shaking. David continued to maintain his outward composure, but the knuckles of his fingers gripping the edge of the table turned white. Mr. Connolly, Mrs. Connolly, Dawson said softly, looking at them in turn. I don't believe you meant to hurt Ash, but I'm sure you both know what happened that night. And the longer you hide the truth, the worse it looks. The lawyer was about to say something, but Liza suddenly raised her head, tears in her eyes. I can't take it anymore, David, she whispered, looking at her husband. I can't live with this anymore. Liza, don't. There was a warning in his voice. No, I have to. She turned to Dawson. It was an accident. No one wanted Ash to die. The lawyer interjected. I advise my clients not to make any statements until... No, Liza interrupted sharply. I want to tell the truth. I'm tired of waking up every night seeing his face underwater. David closed his eyes, giving up. The lawyer leaned back in her chair disapprovingly. I did meet Ash at the pool at 10 o'clock at night, Liza began, wiping away her tears. We talked, had a few drinks. I told him I wanted to save the marriage, that I couldn't see him anymore. He was upset, but he understood. I left around 11:30, came home and went to bed. You've told me all this before, Dawson said. Yes, but... Liza took a deep breath. I woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning to the sound of the door slamming. David wasn't in bed. I freaked out and went to look for him. When I went outside, I saw him coming back from the pool. He was, very agitated. David sat still, staring at one point. What did he say to you? Dawson asked. Nothing at first, but I could see something was wrong. His clothes were wet, and he looked scared. Liza looked at her husband again. I insisted until he told me that he went to the pool to talk to Ash. Why? David wanted to make sure that it was really over between us, that Ash would leave us alone. And what happened at the pool? Liza was silent, as if she couldn't go on. David spoke then, his voice low. I found him there by the pool. He was sitting alone, staring at the water. I went over, introduced myself, said I was Liza's husband, and I wanted to talk to him. Did he threaten you or provoke you in any way? No, David shook his head. He was polite, said he knew who I was, that Liza had told me a lot about our marriage. It made me angry, the idea that she was discussing our relationship with an outsider. He paused. We started to argue. He said he understood Liza better than I did, that she was never really happy with me, that she was going to leave. And you were angry, Dawson stated. Yes, David admitted. I told him to stay away from us. He stood up, said that this conversation was pointless, and that it was up to Liza to decide. He turned to leave, and I pushed him. You pushed him, Dawson repeated. How hard? Not very hard, I swear. David sounded desperate. I just wanted him to hear me out, but he was at the edge of the pool. He lost his balance, stepped back, and hit his head on the edge. And then, he fell into the water. Did you try to help him? Of course I did. I rushed to the pool, but David stopped talking, staring at the floor. He wasn't moving anymore. The blood from his head was spreading into the water. I tried to pull him out, but it was too late. He was dead. Liza cried quietly, covering her face with her hands. And you decided not to tell anyone about it, Dawson said. You came home, told your wife, and together you decided to hide the truth. We panicked, Liza whispered. David came home terrified, told us what had happened. We knew what it looked like. A husband who found out about the affair accidentally kills his wife's lover. It was an accident, David insisted. I didn't mean to hurt him. I just wanted to talk. Dawson looked at the Kennelly couple with a mishmash of feelings. On the one hand, she was angry at them for lying and hiding the truth. On the other, she understood their fear and panic at the situation. Mr. Connolly, she said at last, do you realize that you have just confessed to manslaughter? Yes, he answered quietly. I realize that. And you, Mrs. Connolly, to accessory after the fact. Liza nodded without raising her eyes. Dawson signaled to the officer at the door. David Connolly, you're under arrest on suspicion of manslaughter in the murder of Ash Kinney. Liza Connolly, you're under arrest for accessory after the fact to the crime. You have the right to remain silent. As the officer read their rights, Dawson watched the couple closely. They sat holding hands, as if on the edge of a precipice, bound by a secret that could both destroy their lives and perhaps begin the healing process. There was a strange mixture of fear and relief in their eyes. Dawson walked out of the interrogation room feeling heavy with the outcome of the case. One impulsive action, one moment of anger, and 3 lives forever changed. David Connolly would likely get several years in prison for manslaughter. Liza could get probation, and Ash Kinney, there's no bringing him back. In her office, Dawson sat at her desk and began filling out the report. The investigation was complete, but a sense of incompleteness remained. This wasn't a coldly planned revenge, not a violent crime of jealousy, just an accident, grown out of human emotions, fears, and mistakes, and the cowardly decision to hide the truth that followed. Dawson glanced at the photograph of Ash Kinney, the young man whose life had been cut short so early and ridiculously. He, like the Connolly couple, was simply trying to find his place in this complex world, his happiness. And for that, he had paid the ultimate price. Dawson closed the case file and looked at her watch. It was almost 10 o'clock at night. The day was over, the investigation complete. Justice has been served, she thought ironically. She walked out of the precinct building and took a deep breath of Austin's night air. Somewhere in another part of the city, Liza Connolly sat in her cell, for the first time in 2 weeks, not trying to pretend nothing had happened. In the next cell block was David, the man whose life had split into a before and an after, the moment his hand had pushed Ash Kinney away. Only Ash was nowhere to be found anymore, and he wouldn't be. Dawson lit a cigarette. In this job, sometimes you need something to help you forget what you've seen and heard, especially when the case wasn't about monsters, but about ordinary people who were so tangled up in their feelings that there was no way out. The case was closed. The murder was solved. But no amount of reporting, questioning, and confessions would answer the ultimate question. What makes people choose lies over the truth, even when the price of those lies is their own lives? She put out her cigarette and walked to her car. Tomorrow would be a new day and a new case. Life goes on.